This week's forecast comes after a trading week that concluded with a sell-off of high-risk asset classes following some risk-off sentiment. So in this forecast, I will be looking at some trading opportunities leading into this coming week, and also how we could have positioned ourselves in the past week in relation to the VIX. So starting off with the VIX, we can see that on Monday, volatility decreased as there was no fear in the market. However, as fear crept in just moments before the Fed chair started to speak, we saw that volatility began to increase, and on Friday we could have spotted early signs that the trading day would have been one of risk off sentiment. So we can see right here, as this risk off sentiment came, volatility was quite aggressive to the upside. So right now, coming into this next trading week, we can assume that this is likely to continue and prices are likely to move further in favor of safe havens as we look to move off this high risk asset classes. And if we look at the dollar, we can see that due to this risk of sentiment, price action was able to remove this weekly level of supply here. And over here, there is a demand zone here, which is in control and which strength is in favor of. So right now, if we switch down to the daily time frame to look for setups, we can see that in the past week, there was a setup here, but due to the fact that price action had already taken out this weekly supply level, then it wouldn't have held. So right now, as things stand, if we are going to look for trading opportunities, given that we're in a risk of sentiment, I would say that if the dollar was to move back into this level of daily demand, then it would provide an opportunity to look for long trades. That's if we're in a risk off sentiment or risk off market. So right now, again, prices could be heading up to this level of weekly supply where there is a level of daily supply. So from my end, I would look for opportunities for the dollar to pull back into this demand zone here in order for myself to look for long trades. So with that being said, let me begin with the forecast. And starting off with the Euro USD, we can see that on the weekly time frame, strength was to the downside, and since then, prices have moved into this level of weekly demand. Prices have since respected this weekly zone of demand, and right now, if we move down to the daily time frame to look for setups, we can see that as it stands, there is a setup over here which could provide us the opportunity to look for long trades. But however, due to the fact that we are in a risk of sentiment, I wouldn't be in favor of actually looking for long trades off this zone over here. So what I am rather seeing is that given that we're in a risk of market, prices could look for a pullback in the lower time frame since there is no daily supply all the way up until here. Price action could immediately sell off having reached a 4-hour level of supply. So right now, given that the current risk sentiment is to the downside, I do not believe that price action will move prices to the upside. So if you're looking for opportunities to the sell side, the supply zones which exist is all the way up here. Instead, if we are looking for a setup, we would want prices to move at the supply zone here and create a daily level of supply in conjunction to this weekly level of supply. So with that being said, I'll move on to the US dollar CAD. If we look at the US dollar CAD, we can see that in the past week, price action closed off having created a weekly level of demand, which came after a considerable long period of time. It took almost a month for prices to actually engulf this bearish candle. So right now, as things stand, what we can say that if we were to look for trading setups in the past week, we saw that over here this level of demand worked quite well, having firstly missed it over here. So right here prices failed to reach here, and due to the fact that we always look to respect our levels and not jump the gun. We saw that price action eventually came back here before moving to the upside. So as this risk of sentiment was creeping into the market, it could have offered us an opportunity to look for long trade setup. So since price action contacted a level of weekly demand, we can now start to say that there is a level of daily demand whereby if price action was to return to it, it could provide us the opportunity to look for long trades, since it is in conjunction of this weekly level of demand which had been created all the way over here. So this level has provided an opportunity for long trades, and it is holding prices from moving down, as this level is preventing prices from moving down. So right now on the USDcad, we can say that price action is moving quite sideways. So with that being said, I will now move on to the pound dollar. And if we look at the pound dollar, we can see that price action continued its movement to the downside as a new level of weekly supply was created. So we saw prices creating a supply zone over here, and while doing that, it removed a level of weekly demand situated there. So right now, price action has pierced through multiple levels of daily demand, which I'll get soon into. But right now, price action is contacting this level of weekly demand, and it seems like there is no daily demand which could prevent it from breaking below. But however, in the backdrop of that happening, then we can begin to look for setups to the upside. But until then, there isn't anything in terms of setup. So right now, if we are talking about risk of sentiment, we saw that there was this buying opportunity here on Tuesday, but due to this risk of sentiment on Thursday, prices just merely missed off this level, which could have provided us with selling opportunities, and prices since then have moved down. So on coming into Friday, given that on the VIX we could have spotted the risk of sentiment, we could have instead not been looking for long trades to the upside. Instead, we would have assumed that if prices were to return up here, it would offer us opportunities to the downside. But irregardless of that, we can also note the fact that price action did remove multiple levels of daily demand over here and over here as well. So right now, as things stand, it's important to first wait and see whether or not new levels could be formed in order to find setups on the daily time frame. So as it stands over here, there is a level of supply which we can take during this risk of sentiment. If sentiment was to change back to risk on, then this zone over here would not be the best option to short. Instead, what we would be looking for is for daily levels to form at these levels of weekly supply. So if we move on to the NASDAQ, we can see that in the past week, price action moved down lower to this level of daily demand. So now, given the fact that we are in a risk of sentiment, I am unlikely to take this zone of demand as long as the sentiment is in play. But if there is a change, it could provide myself with the opportunity to look for long trades, since I've been looking to take setups here to the upside for quite some time. However, if you look down to the daily time frame, we can see that there hasn't been much in terms of setups. If we are to look for sell side opportunities, I could say that given this risk of sentiment, this zone here could work quite well. So it's important to also note that given that last week we were in this risk of sentiment, we could have actually taken this zone of supply here in order to look for short trades all the way down here, having seen that prices were starting to turn over right here, if I could say so. Depending on how we are aggressive or how our entries are, we could have found opportunities to the downside. But like I've always said, I'm not a fan of shorting the indices. Instead, I just look for shorting opportunities in order to try to find the best areas to buy the indices, if I could say, to position my entries. So with that being said, I will now move on to the US30. And if we look at the US30, we can see that in the past week a new level of supply has been created on the weekly time frame. So here it gives me at least two possible areas to actually draw this supply zone near, which is at the zone which I drew it, or it could be over here since there is a hidden level of supply. But right now I think it would be best for myself to use this level of weekly supply. So right now, as things stand, I would be looking for possibly a bounce here, but that would only provide me with the opportunities to look for day trades. That's if we're in a risk on market condition. So if we move down to the daily time frame, what we can see is that given the fact that we want in a risk off market condition up until Thursday, we can see that the zone which could have offered us the best possibility to short would have been this one over here. If we used this one here, then it's a matter of understanding that we were just anticipating this as a stop hunt and a possibility to look for short trades. So price action did move here, but again, this was all down to the news. Given that we understand how we understand the news in terms of interest rates and all those stuff, we need to understand that interest rate hikes are good for the dollar currency, but they're not as good for the indices, if I could say so. Right now, what the Fed is trying to do is increase interest rates. So right now, we can say that although there is an opportunity to look for long trades, it is quite not a favorable trade in this given conditions. But from my end, it's a matter of just controlling risk and seeing whether or not if I buy here, it could offer me a possibility to find moves to the upside for the long term. If it doesn't work out, it's trading at the end of the day. Everything works on probability and not on certainty. So in terms of buying setups, I would look for a buy setup here if we do find a risk on market condition. And with that being said, if it fails to hold here during a risk on or risk off market condition, I would look for a bounce somewhere in this level of weekly demand zones here in order to look for long trades. But right now, as things stand, things are looking quite to the sell side, so there is a possibility that we may see further moves to the downside. And moving on to oil, we can see that on oil there hasn't been anything quite interesting since my exit of the trade to the downside. So there hasn't been any new level of demand or supply created in the higher time frame. However, if we look down to the daily time frame, we can see that also in this regards there hasn't been anything quite significant in terms of weekly zones creating demand zones. So right now from my end, I wouldn't be interested in participating on oil, but in terms of how to gauge it, I'm still feeling that there is a difficulty on my end due to the fact that we are still experiencing this inflation and the high costs of living, meaning that it's good for oil, but due to what we saw in terms of the US president suggesting that there will be a release of over a million barrels per day of oil, it kind of puts me in a mixed position in terms of understanding where price action is likely to move higher to the downside, as I am unsure on how this may affect the overall market. So probably people who are better equipped with understanding this would have an idea on which side to trade. So from my end, I wouldn't want to be interested in looking for any trades to the upside or to the downside in terms of fundamentals or sentiment. But in terms of technicals, either way, there isn't any setup in favor of looking for short entries or long entries in my regard. So with that being said, I will move on to Bitcoin. And now lastly, looking at Bitcoin. If we look at Bitcoin, we can see in that in the current week, prices have since formed a doji candle, having pushed up to this upper echelon of this psychological zone. So if we move down to the lower time frame, or before I actually move on to the lower time frame, I can spot a weekly level of supply right here. So right now, price action has created a new level of weekly supply, which suggests that the sellers are in control of the market. So if we move down to the daily time frame, what we can see is that in the past week, a new level of daily supply was created right here as price action returned up here. So right now, there is possibilities to find shorting opportunities on Bitcoin if prices to return here. This is not to say that having contacted here, price action didn't create another level of daily demand, if I could say. So right now there is quite a tight level of supply and demand, both in terms of the weekly time frame and the daily time frames. But as I've said previously, I am of the view that Bitcoin could start selling off. So right now from my end, I would be looking for short entries, but that's not to say that I would short Bitcoin. But if I was to, this would be the best possible place to short Bitcoin. The reason why I'm not shorting Bitcoin is due to the fact that I just want to be someone who can buy and hold it. And right now, the current market conditions are suggesting that this is not the best time to actually be buying. Instead, that opportunity may come in later in the year or even next year. But all I need to just be doing is just be alert of any changes which may happen. So if you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to hit the like button and also subscribe to the channel. With that being said, FX Entities signing out.